is our interim deputy commissioner, Lorette Woods. And then on my immediate right, our director of fiscal management, April Weeks. And so we will go ahead and move forward with our presentation. And so we have on that second slide, you will see the current DHR organizational structure that will show you the commissioner and deputy commissioner level positions, and it then walks you through the respective major divisions within the Department of Human Resources. You'll see the Budget and Fiscal Management Office, our Office of Marketing and Communications, our Office of Employee and Labor Relations, our Office of Policy and Planning, Office of Employee Benefits, Talent Acquisition, Organizational and Employee Development, HRIS and Records Management, Psychological Services, which manages our Employee Assistance Program, and our HR Business Partner Group. We'll go to slide 3. That will give you a high-level overview of the Department of Human Resource highlights for fiscal year 22. And so wanted to just share with you a couple of things. I know we've mentioned most of these through our quarterly presentations. The first, wanted to just spend a little bit of time to recognize the Employee Spotlight Award program, which we instituted as part of FY22. That is a program that is available for nominations not only internally from employees' peers, but it is also available to the public at large. That nomination process can be facilitated through the employee's through the city's public website. So there is a prominent link on the city's home page as well as on the Human Resources page. That program is designed to ensure we provide opportunities for employees to be recognized based on 3 core values, and that's customer service, ethical conduct, and equity. We're averaging a little bit over 80, 85 employees that have been recognized per quarter under the Employee Spotlight Award program. So we're fourth quarter, and we will complete that FY22 cycle at the end of June. Secondly, wanted to just highlight we do continue to provide hiring blitz across the city to support our operating departments. Did want to bring a little bit of special attention to a lot of the good work we have done in the Department of Public Works. That included earlier last fall, making sure that we also provided an opportunity from a recruitment standpoint to be able to leverage, signing incentives to appropriately assist with recruiting environmental service workers as well as CDL drivers within the Department of Public Works. Likewise, as part of FY22, we did activate the city's learning management system that is commonly referred to as ATL Cloud Learn. That allows for us to disseminate mandatory compliance training throughout the entire enterprise. We have introduced the active shooter, active attack, sexual harassment prevention training, the LGBTQ cultural humility training, as well as cybersecurity training. We also currently have in process training relative to our code of ethics, and as part of supporting telework opportunities at the city, we have also introduced telework training, not only for those individual employees, but for their managers as well. Shift to talk a little bit about COVID-19 preparation. As part of making sure that we understood the complete population here at the city from a workforce perspective, we did conduct a mandatory citywide self-certification of COVID-19 vaccination status. We followed that up with making sure that we were able to provide on-site mobile COVID-19 education and vaccination opportunities for all city employees. That was coupled with the provision of a $100 employee incentive program for initial COVID-19 vaccinations as well as COVID-19 booster shots. We will continue with those vaccination opportunities. The incentive program for vaccinations is scheduled to sunset at the end of this fiscal year, and we do have a major vaccination opportunity that is scheduled for June 25th that will be held here at City Hall as well. Lastly, just wanted to highlight as part of FY22 our efforts to ensure that we continue to focus on our critical infrastructure employees, and that included the provision of premium pay, and that was afforded to individuals within the Department of Public Works, Department of Transportation, Department of Enterprise Management, and the Department of Corrections. We can shift to page 4 of the presentation that's entitled Summary of Current Operations. You'll see at the top of the slide the budget trends for the DHR organization. You will see that those numbers reflect all of our funding across the enterprise, general fund, as well as the other funds, including the enterprise funds that support us. You'll see that from FY20 to FY22, HR has seen a decrease of about 18% in our budget. For FY23, we're seeing a modest increase of 16%. HR's overall FY23 proposed budget is $13.6 million. The additional funding increase is due to personnel expenses and purchase contract services category. That's primarily to ensure that we have appropriate funding for this citywide compensation study. The expenses for the citywide compensation study are scheduled to be split amongst all funds. You'll see that we experienced a head count decrease of 1 FTE from FY22 to the proposed FTEs for FY23. Overall head count for FY23 is 137 authorized positions. You will see in the bottom right corner the breakdown of our active and unfunded positions. We currently have 118 active employees, and we currently have 19 vacant unfunded positions. I would just note that personnel comprises 86.5% of our proposed budget, including covering all of our field positions. We can go to slide 5. Slide 5 just gives you an overall general idea as to some of the things that we were looking at from a broad perspective relative to making sure that we meet the needs of our employee workforce. The first is to ensure that we continue to expand mental health awareness initiatives for all of our city employees. That will be facilitated through our psychological services and employee assistance program. Secondly, as we continue to deal with the pandemic and also look at all of the other issues that continue to impact our workforce, we will continue our focus on deepening our relationships and interactions with the city's labor unions. And lastly, relative to group health insurance, we are currently in the midst of the evaluation process for our calendar year 23 employee health care benefits, and we will be following that as well with our health and fitness center management evaluations as well, so that we can bring those successful proponents recommendations before City Council for adoption. We can move to slide 6. Slide 6, wanted to share with you the key metrics that we'll be following and continuing from FY22 into FY23. Just wanted to kind of walk you through what those key metrics are and give you an idea as to how those have averaged for FY22. The first is our time to fill metric. The time to fill metric is an opportunity for us to look at the number of days between a job posting and when an actual offer for that position has been made. We have our benchmark set at 35 days. We still seek to get as close to that benchmark as possible. What we have noticed is that due to some of the constraints on the labor market, that national benchmark has ticked up from 35 days to approximately 42.8 days across the nation. We're currently trending at 47.5 days for time to fill here at the city. Secondly, we have our offer acceptance rate. That's the percentage of extended offers that have been accepted. Benchmark for that acceptance is 95%. We're currently trending at 96%. We definitely believe that the City of Atlanta still holds a very strong place as an employer of choice, and we will continue to focus our recruitment efforts to make sure that folks understand those opportunities and feel confident and comfortable about seeking the city out as an employer of choice. Third, you'll see the employee turnover rate. That's the loss of talent in the workforce for a specified period. Percentage of employees leaving the organization during a specified time period. Pre-pandemic, obviously, that benchmark was set at 5% of the organization. Based on looking at the national benchmark for local governments, as a result of the current job market, that national benchmark is 18%. We are currently hovering about 16.8% employee turnover and attrition here at the City of Atlanta. Fourth metric, citywide mandated training completion rate. That measures city's benefit of employees who complete their training. That provides that we can provide opportunities to mitigate risk, particularly in the areas of all compliance topics and safety. We set the benchmark for 90% completion based on our citywide training that we have pushed out through ATL Cloud Learn. We're currently at an 86% completion rate. The fifth metric is Eap Utilization Rate. That's the number of employees that are utilizing mental health services from our internal licensed professionals. We look to meet the benchmark of 10% of our employee population being able to utilize that program. You'll see that we are currently averaging 9% of that population. That tends to go up and down based on, obviously, issues that the workforce continues to face. We do see upticks the more that we actually push out interactive opportunities for folks to be further informed about opportunities to be able to utilize that program. And last, we have our labor and relations case completion rate. That represents resolution of formal labor and relations cases. The benchmark for completion is 90 days, so approximately 3 months. We are currently trending at a completion rate of 48.4 days. So if we can shift to slide 7. And so slide 7 focuses on our general fund proposed budget. The Department of Human Resources general fund proposed budget is approximately $7.4 million. The operating budget is allocated into 6 primary categories. The personnel category represents 81.7% of the FY23 proposed budget in the amount of approximately $6.4 million. This is due to 57.87 field FTE positions, 5 extra help positions, 5 vacant positions, along with benefit cost. You'll see in our purchase contract services category, which represents 16.69% of the FY23 proposed budget, in an approximate amount of $1.2 million. The funding is slated for contracted obligations with Carosoft, LinkedIn, funding of the citywide compensation study, the Career Builder website, our wireless copier service and membership cost, and a host of other expenses. Additional wireless requests such as MiFi devices will allow for continued technology needs as we continue to leverage in our hybrid telework program. And that also includes minimal postage expenses for mail-in, such as for our Employee Spotlight Awards out to our employee workforce. The third category you will see is the supply category. That's 0.78% of the FY23 proposed budget. That is in the amount of approximately $57,000. Funding is allocated to purchase office supplies, software, such as iSprings, FlipSnack, Titanium, and Clarity Value, our new employee relations database. The department will also need additional laptops and docking stations as we continue to upgrade as well as onboard new staff as part of FY23. The fourth category is our interdepartmental category. That represents approximately 0.42% of the FY23 proposed budget in an amount of approximately $31,000. That allocation is to cover expenses for vehicle fuel and maintenance on 6 vehicles that are utilized by our Employee Assistance Program Division. The allocated FY23 budget is proposed by the Department of Public Works through Fleet Services. You'll see the fifth category, other cost category, which makes up 0.27% of the FY23 proposed budget in the amount of $20,000. That category covers our Civil Service Board member payments, as well as various employee engagement initiatives, such as book club events that are routinely scheduled and will be part of FY23 programming. And last category, we have other financing uses. That is a proposed budget in the amount of $4,898, and that represents coverage of GMA fees. If we can go to slide 8. Slide 8 shows you a general overview of the Department of Human Resources basic plan of operation for FY23. You'll see under personnel deployment strategies, obviously we will continue to focus on making sure, like all operating departments, we maintain our budget within for personnel with our authorized FTEs, and that we keep a close eye on any overtime patterns to make sure that we maintain cost. You'll see under contracts and agreements that we have seen a slight increase in purchase contract services. As mentioned earlier, that is primarily related to coverage of the citywide compensation study, which will allow the city to look to retain and attract qualified employees, as well as ensure fair and equitable compensation relationships within the organization, and also to provide appropriate competitive citywide benefits. And the last category, supply and other cost charges to cover our routine office supplies, technology equipment, software renewals, CSB board member fees, as well as the GMA fee. And if we can go to the last slide, which is slide 9, that will provide a summary of the key deliverables for FY23 and the intended benefits to the City of Atlanta. The first will be the compensation study. So the citywide employee classification and compensation study is designed to ensure all positions with City of Atlanta are internally equitable and externally competitive. The end product of the study will include recommendations for wage comparison with comparable public and private sector entities, compensation plan that will be based on that wage comparison, and suggestions for the development of appropriate incentive compensation plans as well. The second key deliverable will be in the area of performance management. The city has, once again, in leveraging ATL Cloud, will be activating the ATL Cloud Performance Management module. That will become the utilized platform to manage the annual performance management cycle. It will provide a streamlined approach aimed at facilitating frequent and meaningful conversations about performance and development between employees and managers through that full implementation. We have kicked off a pilot of that ATL Cloud Performance Management System. And we anticipate that we will have full rollout of that program by the end of this calendar year. Lastly, talent acquisition. We will continue to partner with our operating departments to implement effective strategies and solutions to drive our business objectives through targeted talent acquisition and employee retention efforts. That will include a bevy of what we are already doing, as well as some additional things such as, creation of employee resource groups. We'll continue with hiring Blitz and job fairs, and we will enhance the level of engagement with our external audience. And we will also continue to focus in coordination with the rollout of our performance management system, the ability to really focus on succession planning as well. That will include making sure that we have an appropriate framework that identifies our current leadership pipeline as we continue to recognize that we have retirements and turnover. And we also plan on establishing a Shining Stars Mentor-Mentee program that will be able to be leveraged by day one employees as well as our current incumbent workforce members. And so that will be kicked off at the beginning of FY23. And so that completes our prepared presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, I'd also like to acknowledge we've been joined by a number of council members. From my left, Councilmember Antonio Lewis, Destin Hillis, Jason Dozier, Byron Amos, Jason Winston, and Liliana Bakhtiari. Let's go ahead and start taking questions. Councilmember Dozier, I saw your hand. Anybody else? And Destin and Lewis.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Norman. Just a quick question on the KPIs that you shared. Yes. Are those citywide or are those specific to the Department of Human Resources?
Those are the citywide metrics, so we do measure those for across the organization. Yes. Okay, and then I guess on that, for the employee turnover rate, it's good to see that we're trending slightly below kind of the national average. I'm assuming this is all employees, so regardless of schedule, regardless of tenure. That is correct.
Are you seeing any trends in terms of increased turnover rates for certain tranches of our employees, and how does that compare against the national average? So like our managers versus our frontline employees versus maybe directors or above?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be pretty measured, so we're not necessarily seeing, a big void in any one area. So, for example, we know, state of Georgia, is hovering about 23% relative to their current attrition. What we do recognize is we kind of looked at the demographics for our employee workforce. We do have an aging population, across the city. So we'll continue to see those folks who are nearing retirement as well as those folks who are at retirement age going ahead and leaving the organization. So we do anticipate, that piece of it. We also recognize that across the nation, it's really an employee market at this point. Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of opportunities out there. And we, one of the trends we're seeing is that, there's this new trend where because of remote opportunities, individuals are able to work across the nation without necessarily moving, getting up and relocating physically. So we are starting to see people leveraging that as well. So we balance that, with our telework opportunities as well and our hybrid opportunities as well as our in-person. But we see that consistently across the organization.
Okay. And a lot of, big part of the reason why I asked that question is just anecdotally, as I've talked to employees out, doing work in the streets, and I know the cost of living is impacting our city employees just as much as it's impacting many other people in our communities. And so if I'm a city employee and I have to live in Douglas or Paulding County because that's where I can find an affordable place to live, that commute to downtown Atlanta doesn't necessarily make financial sense for me, especially with the cost of gas. So I imagine that's what just really concerns me is as we explore programs or opportunities to attract or retain employees. That's something that I think about a lot, and I would love to have an offline conversation with you about some ways in which we can try to retain or attract our city employees. And I guess just on that note, can you talk through some of the any specific programs that are available to potential new city employees? I know, for instance, for police, they have signing bonuses if you have a certain level of education. I know when the police union presented a couple of weeks ago, they recommended a program specifically targeting military veterans that could potentially use a similar bonus structure. I don't know if there's anything similar across the board, across the city, that is used to attract employees versus just public safety. And if so, if you could talk to it. If not, that's fine. I'm just curious kind of what we're currently doing.
No, thank you for that question. So we do leverage, for example, when you talk about incentives, so we do have embedded within other departments within the city recognition for work-related certifications, as well as certain levels of education. So that is tempered throughout the organization. So that is another component as part of our compensation and incentive plans. We do recognize that as part of the current national environment, that as we continue to kind of balance from a functional nature, what our in-person, opportunities are, as well as how we continue to leverage hybrid opportunities and telework opportunities, but still ensure that operating departments are able to meet their, customer service requirements. That is a fluid situation, but obviously we recognize the challenges which we are looking at nationwide relative to cost of living increases. There is embedded in this proposed budget a cost of living adjustment that will be applied for FY23. And we also anticipate, as we talked about a little with the citywide compensation study, that will really give us some direct insight as to where we look here at the city from a market perspective, and then we can intelligently have those discussions to make sure that we really align the city's resources to support our current workforce, as well as have the ability to effectively recruit new individuals into the organization as well. And so there are other, things that we continue to leverage as well. And, some of those things I've seen peppered in some of the proposals in legislation that's currently, before this body. So as people continue to look at things such as, sick leave bonuses, whether you have hiring incentives as we have done. So we just continue to look at that medley of resources to make sure that we're being very thoughtful and judicious of our funds, but making sure that, once again, we stay aligned with the market to ensure that we really do stay competitive in the market.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I yield.
Councilmember Hillis, then Councilmember Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman Wan. Thank you, Commissioner, for the presentation. A few questions. On the EAP program, which is what I get probably the most calls about, what in particular in this budget helps enhance that program, and what is the current staffing level of that program?
So we currently have approximately 12 mental health professionals that are assigned to our employee assistance program. Some of the enhancements that we're looking for FY23, we've had discussions with our public safety agencies, primarily within the police department as well as the Department of Fire Rescue. And so we actually are in the process of hiring dedicated staff to support those two entities. We have also revamped our model to ensure that we have appropriate coverage and assignment across the organization. Obviously, we do get, in the past, we have had a considerable focus within those public safety agencies because we have to often respond to shootings that occur in the line of duty and things of that nature, and obviously the stressful nature of that space. But that is why we are dedicating, as we kind of see a rise in some of the challenges facing those communities. We are helping them define out some day-to-day programs that will really support those levels and programming efforts. So it is more of a day-to-day integrated type of experience than you just kind of, react when they come to you. And so we are enhancing personnel within that division as part of this budget to provide that direct support. And likewise, because we have also looked at, the same needs throughout the organization, whether that's watershed, whether that's public works, we want to make sure that everybody has that equitable, same type of day-to-day experience. So in addition to pushing out additional self-help tools, it's really about making sure we have the dedicated programming. And so we're really stepping up the programming. We have folks, as opposed to waiting for folks to come see you at the office, we're making sure that we actually have, scheduled opportunities for touch base opportunities at our facilities, and making sure that they understand all of the resources that they can leverage through that organization. So we're confident that kind of beefing up those resources is really going to pay off in the long run, as opposed to being proactive as opposed to simply reactive in that space.
Gotcha. Well, glad to hear of moving that position to have the dedicated staff for our public safety agencies. Now, is that already accounted for in those 12 current positions? Because I see you're not funding any of your vacancies.
So we have we have one position that is actually being transferred from AFRD under the EAP umbrella, and then we will be able to account for reassignment for that police position as well.
Okay. And you maybe touched on it in your previous explanation, but how are we going to better get the word out and enhance the utilization of this great program? And just also letting people know that, there's no shame in seeking assistance. I mean, I sat through a few budget hearings and feel like I need some assistance every once in a while, but how can we get the word out and get more utilization of this program?
So we probably about a week ago, we were able to finalize standing up a actual, web page that is specifically dedicated to EAP. We're doing that as part of our contracted services. We have a health-based database that allows us to leverage and allow a lot of resources and tools. And so we stood that up last week. We anticipate there will be a much more fanfare for FY23, but we have been starting to push that out as part of the interaction at the department level. But we most likely will have some public events. We have also had our EAP staff, at some of the public events, whether that be, the mayor's, basketball events on Wednesdays. But more importantly, as we've done vaccination events and things like that, along with our healthcare partners, we have had our EAP division available. But they are really going out and making those direct connections with the workforce, going to the facilities. It is not any more of the only thing you'll see is kind of the email announcements. So they're literally getting out there on foot, on site, having those discussions directly with members of the workforce.
And when an employee wants to utilize EAP, do we currently offer multiple, modes of interaction? Can they come in and talk to someone? Can they call? Can they have a video call, text?
That is correct. And so we're able to leverage telehealth opportunities as well. They can come in. It is often to the preference, it's not unusual to have those initial conversations via telephone call so that it can be appropriately screened. So yeah, we're able to leverage all of those modes of interaction to make sure that it's as convenient for our employee population. Yes.
Thank you for that on EAP. Moving on to something else, the paying class study, you said that is funded in the contracted services portion of your budget?
That is
correct. $750K, is that correct?
That is correct. It's about $800,000.
Okay. What is the timeline both for presenting that to council and, depending on what it says, I guess it could be different, but, adoption of those suggestions, because obviously it's a very large covers the whole city, so.
Yes. So thank you for that question. So the RFP is currently out. And so we are obviously hopeful that we're able to identify a successful proponent shortly. From the city's time perspective, our expectation and ask of whoever the successful proponent is, we'd like to see those results in the second quarter of fiscal year 23, so that gives us significant time to be able to have those discussions, within the administration, as well as have discussions with council about, what some of the recommendations may be from a compensation perspective. But we're hopeful that as soon as we're able to identify a successful proponent, that we'll bring that legislation back before the council.
And that, just to be clear, that is citywide, even.
That is citywide.
Even fire,
That covers
study,
every department. That will include public safety. It include aviation, all our enterprise funds. It will include every department here at the City of Atlanta.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hillis. Mr. Lewis, followed by Mr. Shook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Norman, for coming today. My questions are all surrounding around the average time to hire a person. And I see we have it takes us 47.5 days. And how long has that been a thing for us? What I mean is, how long has that period been? Because I know for one person, it took over about 65 days.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Lewis. And so, as you understand, I mean that represents the average across the organization. And as I talked a little bit earlier, we really were trending a little bit under that 35-day benchmark prior to the onset of the pandemic. And so we have seen, for example, through the background check process, obviously we can't control the information that we rely upon and our vendor relies upon to be able to perform those checks, whether it be for education verification, whether it be for the criminal history. For a while, obviously, much like the city, there has been a balance of being able to meet those customer service delivery requirements for those external agencies. So we did see a little bit of a slowdown in response rates. And part of it as well is that, that also includes the engagement for the hiring departments, with those actual individual applicants. And so that is the time that they need to evaluate and prioritize and ultimately identify a candidate. So there clearly are outliers in that process based on different things, whether it be on the applicant, whether it is the hiring department, based on other, requirements not being able to get through that swiftly. But that average metric result does, trend across the entire organization. So you will see that in some departments it's significantly under that 35-day mark, but others, it may be above that. It may be more consistent, I think, with that national benchmark, but we also may have some other outliers that throw that average off as well.
So my question is then going to the outliers. Do you have the year-to-date average for each department? Because I'm thinking about the departments. Right now we have a summer internship program going on, and the airport was able to hire students in a 2-week period. I've seen those students started yesterday. Other students in the city of Atlanta haven't started yet. And so that's why I'm wondering, what's the difference is it maybe it's 47 days because the airport is hiring folks in 14 days, but watershed or public works is taking 90 days, and the average is 47. I want to know which departments are, and also I want to know which departments that we directly hire for the city. What's the average for y'all?
Okay.
Because I know I'm able to see. Yesterday I went and spoke to the students because they started and they had their badges, they had shirts for 3 days, and I'm wondering. I know the airport is a part of us, and so I'm wondering like what's the hold up in there.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Lewis. And so, number one, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize April Broaders, who is here with us today in the audience. She is our HR director for the aviation department. So, yeah, definite kudos to her and her team. They were exemplary in ensuring that they, fast-paced, those onboardings of those summer youth participants. And so, as always, they have a tremendous team out there to support the airport. So definitely kudos to that. I mean, it is par for course for the service they provide on a daily basis. We have had the opportunity to onboard other summer youth participants here at the city. I did have an opportunity. We had, 3 actual orientations last week, one of which was here at City Hall. So I did have the opportunity to provide a welcome and introduction to, I think we had 35 individuals who participated in that program. We had similar orientation opportunities as we onboarded other summer youth participants. And so, we have been engaged and will continue to be engaged. Whether those were as visible, we do have other summer youth that have been onboarded. We are interfacing with them. We continue to provide opportunities throughout the summer to onboard additional interns as well. And so, for example, DHR has not gotten through the process. We'll be doing some minimal intern opportunities as well. So different departments have different timelines as well. But yeah, I don't want to leave you with the mistaken belief that, the only place where we've done it is at the airport. It may not have been as visible, but we continue to move forward. That process has been very successful. I don't have those specific metrics with me this morning, but I'll pull those and get those
Not
to
metrics. Could you find out if we onboarded college students or high school students? Because I know
Yes.
the high school students are. I hired 7 in my office, and they haven't been onboarded yet.
Okay.
Through the internship program.
Okay.
So I want to know. I've seen the college students. One of my students is actually in the audience today. She was in here yesterday. Because she was hired as a college student. She applied in February. But I want to know if the high school students that we promised those jobs are being contacted, because I'm having to hire them until y'all contact them.
Okay. Well, yeah, we would definitely go back, engage with our Summer Youth Engagement Director through the exec offices and make sure we get you that information.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. Next, Mr. Shook.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. And forgive me if you've already distributed this, but when are we, if we haven't already gotten it, going to receive the annual, sort of my annual request showing how the employee evaluations shake out by department?
So I do not believe we distributed that as of yet, but I will make sure that you get that that information after the meeting.
Okay. So then that leads to a question I need a little more clarity on slide 9 under performance management. You wish to implement a streamlined approach aimed at facilitating frequent and meaningful conversations about performance and development between employee and manager through full implementation of the ATL Cloud Performance Management. So I'm sorry, that's kind of bureaucrat speak. Could you break that down, what that means in terms of how you're going to get there from where we've historically been?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councilmember Shook. So we have been engaged with the respective departments over this last couple of months where we have been working to establish employee competencies based on the different categories of our workforce groups, and making sure that those are aligned with specific goals at each department level. As you are clearly aware, there has been what I'll describe as a little bit of a disjointed process for performance evaluations here at the city. Those were still performed in a manual type of process, and so this will allow for engagement directly through our Oracle platform, where that process will be facilitated, managed, documented, memorialized through that vehicle. We will have a consistent approach and ability to leverage that. There will also be more meaningful opportunities to not only have that annual cycle and sit down, but it will time and provide time markers and reminders and things of that nature that will allow for actual reporting, so we can identify, deficiencies in individuals who have not gone through that process. Because we have been advised in the past that there are some folks, because there has not been direct connectivity for any type of meaningful pay for performance system as a result of that evaluation, that has really been a little bit of a discarded process. And so this will allow for appropriate tracking and identification, and making sure that those are not only aligned with the city's overall strategic goals, but that it is actually memorialized at each department level. And also it makes sure that, as we start talking about making sure that as you evaluate folks, they have full transparency on what those responsibilities are. Those are things that will be captured as part of that platform as well. So there's more transparency not only to the employee, but it provides those additional resources for management to be able to effectively perform those performance evaluations, and includes not only quarterly, but mid-cycle review opportunities. And once again, we can better control that because obviously we can track that through that electronic platform.
Why haven't we gotten there in all this time? And for those of you who have not perused any of these historical reports, they typically show that in an average year, around 0.5% of the city employees fall into the needs improvement category, which is otherworldly. And I know evaluating employees is the toughest thing in either the public or private sector. Everyone hates it. It's shared misery. But what's the problem with this institution?
So some of that breakdown, I think, kind of predates me. But what I will tell you, from my discussions with individuals here at the city and having been here in a different capacity, I think that the reality is that, they're lingered after we kind of moved from, a different type of classification system. Once we announced, meaning the city announced at some point that as opposed to having these really, graduated increases here at the city, that it would shift to a pay for performance type of model. That never solidified. And so, that's exactly what we've recognized. That's exactly why we've done this work, to ensure that we can connect those two, so that when we talk about, even from a budgeting perspective, how folks can look at and have those results, so as they go through this process, the budgeting process, they also account for those performance increases, determine, what those curves may look like. So we just want to make sure that we're able, as we're doing across the organization, really take advantage of the resources we have at our disposal and use data to basically inform decision making.
Do you know, and this will be my last question on this topic, do you know how many city employees conduct and generate evaluations?
I do not have that number in front of me, but we'll go back and pull that data.
I'd be curious, because it seems to me it's sort of to turn the page on that, the evaluators have to be, I don't want to say evaluated, but they need help, they need to be coached up, because the system only works. Pay for performance, didn't work because most of the employees just frankly regard the current system as invalid in terms of the evaluation process. So we have to kind of start at the beginning and coach up,
Yes.
And support the people who are doing these evaluations. Do you know what the current livable wage is in Georgia? I Googled it, and every site I went to showed me a different number for a family of 4.
I know we have looked at that number in the past. I don't have it with me right in front of me, but yeah, I can pretty quickly grab that, and I'll distribute that.
Some say it's under 15, and others say it's more like 19.
Yeah, clearly, here at the city, we have a minimum wage of $15. Clearly, as we have seen those cost of living increases, which is obviously why, we are recommending a cost of living adjustment this budget year as well. And that is also why we think it's very important to engage in the compensation study so we can really look at the alignment from a market perspective. But I'll pull that average for you. But, we do think as we have looked, even as we kind of look at it from a recruitment standpoint, 15, I think is still very competitive. We have started to, so we don't necessarily believe we're below the market value. We do want to ensure that we really are at a level where we can effectively recruit and retain employees. And so we know, as we've seen inflation and other things creep up, that has impacted even the ability for employees to, maintain a certain level of livability at even $15.
I'm sure I'm not the only one that's kind of pondering that, so if you could get us that hard data, that'd be great.
Sure.
Compensation committees, looking at above-entry hiring and all that have kind of come and gone, and that system has morphed over the years. Is there currently such a framework?
So we do have those discussions, and departments will make those types of requests as part of the vacancy review board process. They will normally identify that hiring range. There are positions where there is authority, obviously, to hire within the full range as well as to the midpoint. But we do routinely have those discussions to make sure that, we remain competitive and that we make those decisions and make sure that folks have those equitable opportunities that really meet the market.
All right, last question regards vacancies. So when HR looks at the Department of Widgets, which over the last 10, 15, 20 years has experienced a plus 20% vacancy rate, at what point or to what extent, if at all, is it HR's role to say, you know what, we're going to consider the average, and that's going to be the number that you have to base your programming and services on. We're just going to stop pretending that next year it's going to be different from 20+%. Is that? Tell me about how that discussion pans out with HR. Is that a finance issue? Is that a COO issue?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Shook. I think it is a collective discussion. Obviously, we work every year to kind of look at, and that is what you will see as part of every budget presentation. You'll see that breakdown between the authorized FTEs, the current field, as well as the vacant unfunded positions. We do intend, as we, get on the other side of the budget, to most likely, especially in that unfunded category, take a very close look at most likely abolishing a significant part of that population of positions, because we have also been looking at some of those trends and some of those, vacancy periods, kind of looking at, where were departments on these positions, a year ago, where were they 2 years ago, or some of these things that have gone for 3 years, and if so, those are the types of things we most likely will be coming back before this body.
But you know and I know what the departments are.
Yes.
Where it's 21, 25%
Yes.
every decade.
And what I'll share with you, and we had this discussion yesterday at the cabinet level. Clearly there's going to be a requirement, at the start of FY23 that there really are defined, staffing plans that are developed. That will start at the department level, but then it will elevate within, the executive organization for review and approval. And that will also be coordinated with the Department of Finance because obviously, we want to make sure that those plans align with the budgeted, personnel spends that are allocated for FY23. We're definitely going to make sure that, just as we all kind of present here and talk about maintaining our budgets, within these adopted amounts, that folks are really truly aligned with what that means and understand how they have to allocate those resources with those dollars.
Okay, so then to review, you're going to get us this year's so-called Shook report and also the Georgia's livable wage.
That is correct, and I think we would have the Shook report after the personnel discussion on Thursday.
Thank you. Ms. Bakhtiari, then Mr.
I like that you said the last question about 10 times. No, anyway, so thank you so much. And I apologize for being late. I have a question that you may have already answered, and I apologize if I'm forcing you to be redundant.
No problem.
The pay study that we're currently doing, it should be done at the end of the calendar year. Is that correct?
So we currently have an RFP out for the citywide compensation study, and so we're hopeful that we will be able to quickly, complete that process. Our ask is that we receive those results hopefully within the second quarter of FY23, so we can then begin those discussions and evaluate those results.
So what are we looking at in terms of how long from the time that is completed to the time in which we will be able to evaluate departments and ensure pay raises? What are you able to give me a ballpark amount of time from start to finish, like what we are looking at?
Obviously the goal is once we receive those results in the second quarter, obviously there's a sense of urgency and understanding, what that data is, what those recommendations may be. We'll engage in those discussions, and so obviously we'll kind of have line of sight, probably near the end, no later than the end of the second quarter, and so that is when we'll really have those productive discussions as to what that really means from going forward for compensation plans.
Right, because I know that we're to speak to what Councilmember Shook brought up. I know that our minimum wage, obviously we're looking at 15, but if we do the calculations and say 40 hours a week at $15 an hour, we're talking lower than, $35,000 a year. So, and a more average minimum wage for someone to live in the city of Orlando, we're looking closer to $30 an hour. Obviously that's a stark jump, but will this study allow us to actually retain? I'm concerned that our minimum wage is much lower, and I know that cities across the country, everyone's facing this right now. Are we going to be able to close that gap? Or are we looking at a massive jump due to inflation, rise of cost of living, everything else? And are we going to we're bringing back a step increase or a COLA program from year in, year out to accommodate for that growth?
So I don't anticipate we go back to a step process. What I will say, just to put it in context, and so even though we're engaging in this citywide compensation study almost on a weekly basis, we still, have done equity adjustments. We still have, departments still have the ability, for example, for performance opportunities to have that up to 10% to adjust salaries as well. So it's not that folks aren't seeing any additional type of compensation during this period. So everybody's not just sitting at $15. And for example, even as we kind of look at the premium pay incentive that we've put out there, which is that additional $312. So even if you had the individuals who are sitting at $15, they currently are receiving, that $18.12 as opposed to a flat $15.
The premium pay, though, was not applied to all departments. That is correct?
That was not all departments, but it did focus. One of the main criteria when the premium pay was imposed, it actually touched critical workers who were at that lower front end of the scale, who had not received any compensation treatment in recent times here at the city. So, for example, we had other individual groups, for example, because I know we have lots of discussions, for example, about E911 and other agencies. Lots of agencies like that, we have done smaller studies, and those folks have received compensation treatment in recent years, most all within the last 2 years. But you had outliers that were at some of these lower things where they had no type of compensation treatment. And that's really that group that you're talking about, which is that $15, frontline.
Is that why premium pay wasn't applied to Watershed, because there had already been adjustments?
They had, if you look at historically, if you look at that, Watershed routinely has adjusted on an annual cycle a lot of those, the salaries. And so you didn't have people who were just sitting, static at the same level, for a 3+ year period. And the other thing that we looked at as well, there are also positions here at the city where there is a component of that salary, much like some of the employees in Watershed, where they already have baked in an additional incentive as part of their compensation based on the nature of the work they perform. So, for example, for some of those workers, they have a built-in hazard pay component that enhances their compensation. And so that's something, for example, you don't see with an ESW in DPW, but you will see that in Watershed. So we just tried to look at it from an equitable standpoint to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to experience some movement.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Amos, then Winston.
Sir, got 2 questions, and they're compound, so you may want to write. Can you explain the criteria for determining which employees are hybrid, telework, or in person? Is it clear, concise, justified, but more importantly, written? And then inside of that determination, do we talk about classification as jobs as far as who's above 19, below 19, directors? And then do the infrastructure for the city supports who is hybrid, teleworking, or in person?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Amos. So there are 2 main components. As part of the onset of the pandemic, we originally identified two broad categories of employees. And so we had approximately 5,400 members of our workforce who were identified as mission critical. And so those mission critical workers were those workers who could not perform their job in a telework capacity. And so that would be, our sanitation workers, those are folks at the airport, those are folks in public safety. So really those folks who had no opportunity and still were required to perform those. That was 5,400, of our workforce out of, right now about 8,200 people. And so that has not changed to this date because those are still people who have to perform their services in an in-person capacity. At that time, at the onset of the pandemic, we moved to a mandatory telework for all non-mission critical employees. So that was regardless of grade, that was regardless of function. If you were not mission critical, then you participated in that mandatory telework deployment. As the pandemic progressed and the vaccine became available and it was widely distributed and folks had an opportunity and COVID took a little bit of a shift. We did terminate the mandatory telework program back in June of 2021. And so we then moved to what we define, and we do have a written policy and a written telework agreement that accompanies that policy that sets out the guidelines for participation in our optional telework program. And so that kind of lays out the requirements for participation in that program. It is not grade specific. It is more of a functional analysis. So at the operating department level, there's a determination as to, what the service delivery needs are for that department, and ultimately that determines, how folks are able to leverage, teleworking, hybrid. I will use DHR for an example. Almost all of the Department of Human Resources employees are currently operating in a hybrid telework capacity, meaning almost all employees within DHR on a hybrid work schedule where they do no less than 3 days a week in person, and then leverage 2 days in a telework capacity, that is give or take. But I have a very small subgroup of individuals, for example, in my HRIS group, who are those individuals who do all of their work through the computer system. And so those folks still are able to leverage that 100% remote opportunity. And so you will see similar types of configurations throughout the city. We obviously are engaged in doing additional analysis to determine the future state here at the city and what that means for employees. But at the end of the day, it really is simplistically based on function because it is a significant priority and mandate for this administration to ensure that we have enhanced service delivery. And what that means is that, some of that does require, based on the nature of the work and the requirements and service delivery here at the city, that folks be available in person. But we do have defined policies relative to that. When we talked about the mandated training, while it is not citywide, we have also done, those types of training opportunities that have been targeted for all of those folks who have authorized telework agreements, because you do have to have an actual approved telework agreement. Those are done first at the department level. Once those are authorized, we do store those agreements within the Oracle database. And then secondly, for those managers, meaning that there's an increased responsibility to be able to manage folks within that type of telework environment. Those folks, once again, who have been identified based on those approved telework agreements, if you manage a teleworker, you have gone through that training as well as to, those components that are required to actually manage, within that situation. But it continues to be a fluid situation, and so we continue to have that level of discussion. The administration obviously continues to evaluate, what that means from a service delivery standpoint, and we'll continue to kind of drive, that model based on those determinations. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Winston, then Mr. Westmoreland.
Thank you, Commissioner Norman.
Good morning.
Excited to see, some smart women that are beside you here today.
Definitely.
I think it's important that we really, pay attention to pay equity as it returns, as we look at the gender gap. What are you doing, or is it based on the compensation study, or what are we doing to ensure that there's pay equity and compensation for our women and gender roles across our city employee?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Winston. So clearly that is not a new consideration here at the city. We do routinely look at the demographics, whether that be with age, whether that be with race, whether that be with gender. And so we do, routinely look at those things. We obviously have a pretty robust population, gender-wise here at the city. And so we're always mindful, regardless of any of those characteristics, that we are looking at functionality as opposed to those other determinant factors when we assess salary. So we do take a look at that. We do evaluate those things, and obviously, that is something the city will continue to be focused on to make sure that not only in that gender realm, but all of the other realms, that at the end of the day, all employees, have an equitable, compensation structure, and that it will not differentiate based on any of those defining characteristics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe this is the first question of the season from Councilmember Westmoreland, so have at.
Breaking my vow of silence. Good morning, Mr. Chair, and everyone. Commissioner, I came in during Councilmember Bakhtiari's questioning, and it reminded me of 21R 4064, which was co-sponsored by 12 members of council last October and passed unanimously, which asked the Commissioner of the Department of Human Resources and the Chief Financial Officer to conduct a feasibility study regarding increasing the minimum wage of all full-time employees to a housing wage to ensure their right to live in the city in which they serve. And it requested that you and the CFO provide the results of that study at the December 15th FEC meeting. And I was wondering if, since that date has passed, we could choose a date in July or August where you and CFO Bauer would be able to come and present on that requested information.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Westmoreland. Yeah, we'd definitely be happy to, and I would say that, I think that it would probably be constructive to probably schedule that for August as we kind of get through making sure we get all of those things we got to get accomplished, rolling off budget. But we'd be more than happy to come before the Finance Exec Committee and present that in August.
Mr. Chair, I don't serve on your committee, but I'm around on August 10th or August 24th and would love to be a part of that conversation.
Duly noted. Thank you, Councilmember. Other questions? I have one last really more comment than question. I appreciate all the focus that you and your team are placing on both the compensation side as well as the recruitment side. I just hope that in this process we don't lose sight of the fact that we should continue to be looking for opportunities to strengthen our organizational structure as well. There's no sense in trying to expend a lot of extra energy that we're having to expend to recruit, and then making salary adjustments if we're not plugging it into the most efficient and optimal skeletons, I should say. I think that's a challenge right now for all institutions, municipalities, private sector. As we kind of come out of the pandemic, I think someone alluded to, we're looking at new ways of working, both virtually and online. We have new tools, but we also should be continually reflecting on, do our departments, do our staffing levels, are they appropriate, and that we are moving into this new next phase with the right team. So I hope that we don't lose sight of that in all this analysis and effort, because I think that third leg of the stool is just as important as the other two. But I do want to appreciate, I know that the last 2 years especially have been particularly challenging for your team as we've been managing both just operationally, but even just the human side of the impact of the pandemic. So I thank y'all for your work. And I appreciate the budget presentation. Everyone's asked the questions I wanted to ask, but we look forward to, I trust y'all will be there on, I guess, Thursday and then next week as we go through the personnel paper.
Yes. And thank you for the comments. Councilmember Juan, I'd be remiss if I did not share that the comments that you made are definitely aligned, with a high priority of the Chief Operating Officer. And so that is something, while we didn't speak to it here today, that is something that is a high priority, of hers. And so we have discussed that at the cabinet level. So it's not something that is, not in play. And also just want to take the opportunity to thank all of the employees of the Department of Human Resources for all the continued hard work that they provide for the city and supporting our operating departments. And we look forward to seeing you guys on Thursday to discuss the personnel paper.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues, we're going to reset as Office of Planning is coming up. We will be on, gosh, I marked it, 361. Thank you, Vice Chair Shook. If you want to turn to that page in your hymnal. And we're just going to keep going until we finish that session and then break for lunch after they're done. All right, good morning. Ms. Siddefall, thank you and your team for the patience in accommodating us as we ran over time on that last one. But let me go ahead and I will turn the floor over to you to introduce your team and then walk us through your budget presentation. We'll allow you to go through the entire thing and then we'll take questions at the end. So thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Juan. Good morning, council members. My name is Janet D. Siddefall. I'm the interim commissioner for the Department of City Planning, and we thank you for this opportunity to review with you our FY23 proposed budget. I have with me here this morning, to my right, to my right, I have our interim deputy commissioner for strategy, Kevin Bacon. Beside him is our director of the Office of Buildings, Gregory Pace. And beside Greg is our director of the Office of Housing and Community Development, Joshua Humphreys. To my left, I have Doug Young, who is our interim director of the Office of Design. And beside Doug is Kieta Holmes, our director of the Office of Zoning and Development.
All right, Ms. Siddefall, I'm being told by the tech folks, if you can just pull the microphone closer to your mouth and speak a little more loudly, that way the Channel 26 can pick it up.
Does this work?
Perfect, thank you.
Good. Wonderful. And I control this. Wonderful. Okay. Just want to make sure I know what direction I'm going in. So as I said, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. The Department of City Planning has had a very interesting FY22. There's never really a dull moment. And we've had a wide array of activities, some of which we conducted with COVID still ongoing, and most of it under a hybrid type situation where some of our employees were coming in on on a hybrid schedule for probably most of the first half of the last fiscal year. So with that, I'd just like to start off by reminding you of the mission of the Department of City Planning, which is to enable high-quality, sustainable, and equitable growth and development in Atlanta by facilitating more options for travel, abundant housing for all people, thriving neighborhoods, exceptional design in architecture and public spaces, preservation of historic resources, innovative regulatory practices, safe and durable buildings, attentive customer service, and resident involvement in all of our work. Guided by the vision of the Atlanta City Design, we carry out this mission by focusing on 7 key areas: accessible and responsive customer service, affordability, economic mobility, growth and diversity, minimizing displacement, preservation and conservation, and finally, public spaces and public life. With this as a backdrop, I'd like to highlight some of the department's major accomplishments for FY22. These accomplishments are organized by the key focus areas that I just outlined. We've provided a full overview of the department's FY20 accomplishments and FY23 proposed program in the budget book, and we have also provided all of you with our new DCP at a glance, which I hope you all received. With so many new council members, we thought it would be very useful to provide you with an overview of some of our major initiatives, the contacts for those initiatives in the various offices, and we hope that it will provide you with a great tool to guide yourselves, your staff, and your constituents. So with that, I will highlight, as I said, the major accomplishments for FY22. The first, and it has been a big focus of ours, not just in FY22, but throughout the pandemic, and that's permitting enhancements. The Office of Buildings continues to steadily increase, the Office of Buildings, continues to see a steady increase in construction valuation over the last decade. Despite a slight decline during the pandemic, this trend is continuing as we come out of the pandemic, and we see a consistent increase in numbers as we become more acclimated to the online submittal and review process. We will continue to implement strategies that enhance the customer experience and provide end-to-end communication and clarity. We implemented the expansion and reorganization of the zoning and building enforcement team to better serve the community with complaints regarding construction permitting. We established an OOB, that is the Office of Buildings University, to provide in-house technical and code training for all staff. And this curriculum includes plan review, permit technician, zoning, and inspection courses to educate and enhance the skill levels of all of our employees. Finally, we launched phase 1 of our electronic plan review, and this has been coming for several years, but we launched it for multifamily projects with the introduction of a new digital platform called SAGES, which helps to streamline the plan distribution and review. We also, as you know, passed legislation to regulate short-term rentals in Atlanta last March. As of March 1st, all owners and operators of short-term rentals must have a permit. We began receiving applications for short-term rental permits in February and began issuing licenses March 1st. Existing owners and operators currently have until September 6th to get a permit due to the recent extension of the deadline for enforcement. We also developed and published the Housing Resource Guide to connect city residents and programs, city residents with programs and resources like fair housing support, information to help residents find affordable housing, and programs that help residents stay in their homes. We released a 2020 Neighborhood Change Report to identify the socioeconomic and demographic changes occurring in Atlanta's neighborhoods between 2010 and 2018. The report analyzes the impact of these changes on individual neighborhoods throughout the city and proposes policy policy interventions to address the negative impact of these changes. As you may know, the City of Atlanta has not updated its zoning ordinance in more than 40 years. In FY22, we kicked off the phased rewrite of the city's zoning ordinance, a 3 to 5 year overhaul that will align with the tenets of the Atlanta City Design. We also completed the 5-year update of the city's comprehensive development plan and titled it Plan A, because we don't have a Plan B, in compliance with the Department of Community Affairs. We successfully finalized Phase 1 of the city's updated development impact fee program. There again, that program had not been touched for almost 30 years. And we updated an ordinance which made some key changes, such as implementation of a new fee structure. Coming in this September, we will be implementing the second phase of that new fee structure. In terms of public land development and the development of the 104 Trinity site across the street, we've been leading a cross-agency group to execute a collaborative structure for public vacant land development with a focus on affordable housing. And as you know, that is a key initiative of our current administration. This has resulted in the successful identification of a development partner for Trinity Avenue and the beginning of a process to identify future partners at other City of Atlanta-owned properties for future public land development. We also created the Housing Innovation Lab to work with partner agencies to introduce new housing typologies into the Atlanta market that expand the type of affordable housing available and improves the quality of life for surrounding neighbors. Chattahoochee Brick acquisition, which we recently approved and are working through acquisition. We have continued to support that project with the implementation of the Chattahoochee Riverlands vision by providing site analysis to support the recent purchase of the Chattahoochee Brick site. We also began the reconstruction of the Broad Street Boardwalk between Lucky Street and Poplar Street. It's anticipated that we will open that project in the summer of 2022, probably in the next few weeks. And this completion will represent a $500,000 investment in returning the boardwalk to full public use. Within our Love Our Places program, we focused primarily on parklets and bicycle parking. We completed the creation of 17 parklets at neighborhood centers across the city, including Cascade Heights, Upper West Side, Downtown, Midtown, Sweet Auburn, and Kirkwood, among others, providing pandemic relief to restaurants in the form of outdoor seating. And we also completed these parklets to set the stage for the rebranding and relaunch of our creative placemaking program. We're continuing to build that creative placemaking program by completing the installation of up to 12 creative bike parking locations and preparing for the next project call in late 2022. And this will improve our capabilities to rapidly design, deploy, and maintain these vital public space improvements. Finally, in terms of on-street dining, we passed legislation to provide restaurants with additional space to operate full-service outdoor dining in the on-street public right-of-way. This was particularly important as we look to counteract the impacts of the pandemic by promoting public health through social distancing. This slide shows our current organizational structure, and I've introduced all of our directors. There have been, as I'm sure you know, a few key changes since I became commissioner. Kevin Bacon, who previously served as our director of the Office of Design, is now serving as interim deputy commissioner for strategy, as I said. Doug Young, who previously served as Kevin's assistant director for historic preservation, is serving as the interim director of design. Greg Pace, of course, continues as our director of the Office of Buildings. Kieta Holmes continues as our director of the Office of Development and Zoning and Development, and Josh Humphreys continues to serve as our director of Housing and Community Development. This next slide provides a budget trend over the last 4 years as part of our summary of operations. As you can see, our FY23 budget is trending upward and shows a net increase of about $1.2 million over last year's budget. And most of that increase is in the category of personnel and employee benefits. As you would expect, our major expenditures are in the personnel and employee benefits category, as well as purchased and contracted services. The other major categories remain pretty much flat. This next slide provides the FY23 headcount breakdown as part of our summary of operations. For FY23, DCP has a total headcount of 293.9 FTEs, which represents an increase of about 60 positions over FY22. The Office of Buildings has the highest number of FTEs to support the review, approval, and issuance of building permits, as well as construction inspections and code enforcement. 219.6 of these positions are filled and funded, and 74.3 are vacant and unfunded. We have no unfunded filled positions and no funded vacant positions. We're working with the Mayor's Office and Finance to strategically fund critical positions to maintain service delivery and support new initiatives. This next slide shows our key performance metrics for critical activities in each of the 4 offices. For the most part, our targets have remained constant despite the city's growth, particularly in construction activity. We have been historically challenged in meeting the 10-day SLA for plan reviews, hence our continued efforts to improve our permitting process. I outlined many of these improvement initiatives during my presentation to CDHS earlier this year. And the other area we have experienced challenges meeting our target is the percent of special administrative permit reviews completed within the 30-day SLA. And we continue to work towards strategies to improve that. Our key deliverables for FY23 are outlined here by focus areas. In terms of accessible and responsive customer service, we will continue to focus on permitting enhancements, implementing the short-term rental program, and reopening the Atlanta City Studio. To provide growth and diversity benefits, we will continue the zoning ordinance rewrite, the launching of Phase 1 of our 2026 CDP update, and completing the Freight Atlanta Northwest Cluster Study and implementing a second increase for impact fees. We have 2 major initiatives we will be focused on to support affordability, and they are completing the pre-development for 5 to 8 city-owned sites as part of the Mayor's Affordable Housing Strike Force, and providing technical assistance to faith-based communities to develop land for housing. Our preservation and conservation efforts will focus on completing a Phase 1 update of the tree protection ordinance that's currently underway and planning efforts to move the Chattahoochee Riverlands vision forward. Finally, to improve the quality of our public spaces and public life, we will be completing bike parking installation as part of our Love Our Places program and promoting the city's technical urbanism guide through community-led public space design and installation of projects. Our last slide depicts the department's basic plan of operations for FY23. As part of our plan for our operational plan, we will continue to implement personnel strategies to maintain service delivery levels and support initiatives, particularly as they relate to improving our permitting process overall, but also to support the expedition of affordable housing projects, key development projects, and pre-development services for public land development. We will also continue to fund contracts and agreements for critical activities such as permitting and public land development, as well as key initiatives like the zoning rewrite and 2026 CDP update, as well as the Chattahoochee Riverlands scoping study, which we'll be putting out, which we will continue to have contractor services for. And finally, under supply and other cost charges, we will continue to fund supplies, board member compensation for our various boards and commissions, as well as the transactional cost of credit card charges. And with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Sitafall. Questions? I have Hillis up, then Dozier, then Amos.
Thank you, Chairman Warren. Thank you, Interim Commissioner Sitafall, for the presentation. First, just starting with your the nitty-gritty and the numbers in your budget. So with personnel, FTEs, you're increasing those by basically 61, but almost all of those at least seem to be unfunded. So what is the, I guess, reason for that?
We have been, as I said, working with the mayor's office to identify critical key positions, particularly in the permitting area, to determine which positions we fund going forward to support the enhancements that we're making. Some of those enhancements entail technological improvements, and others will entail either a change in staffing structure or a change in responsibilities. So as we are moving through these process improvements, we are trying to be very strategic in terms of what we fund and how we fund them, and how we backfill positions. As positions are being vacated, are those responsibilities still germane to the whatever office it is, and be able to look at how we might be able to leverage a vacancy to include additional responsibilities, or combine some responsibilities or add new responsibilities. So we're implementing a funding strategy that we will pay as we go, for lack of a better description.
And my next question was going to be, what, given some of these issues, I probably get the most complaints about, permitting times. When Watershed did their presentation, we talked about site development, because the two I get the most issues from are the site development review time and the arborist time, which the arborist falls under planning. And to me, it's almost misleading that people approve permits for whatever reason to get it off their, or not approve permits, but kick it back to the applicant to get it off their desk, or for whatever reason they're doing that, and then they return it, and that part's on them, whether it's returned in 5 days or 35 days. But then we kick it back to them and add new things that weren't there before. Site development does this, parts of planning does this, and then we use whatever that final approval time is to input those into our performance metrics. So I have a problem with that. So what exactly are we going to do to improve on that, on these permit times? Because particularly in my district, we have people that are trying to build affordable, truly affordable housing, and they're facing 6+ months just to get a permit.
Well, as I said, we have been working diligently for several months now, probably before the beginning of this calendar year, to identify some, I guess you can call them quick fixes, that we can make to our permitting process. I believe I shared many of them with CDHS back in March, but for the benefit of this audience, we've been working with a small group of stakeholders, and these are actual developers who use our permitting process, to identify obstacles and barriers that they were having in the process. And I think we identified something like 12 to 15 different initiatives that we've been working on since. A big part of our challenge with our permitting process is it's not owned by one department. Planning is the window, but as you pointed out, we have to coordinate with watershed. We've got to coordinate in some instances with ATL DOT. We have to coordinate with Public Works and Parks and Rec for review of, trees and tree plants and those types of things if they're in the public right-of-way. So that's been an ongoing challenge. And we have tried to compensate for that and make improvements by looking first at what planning can do to improve its response to complaints and barriers and limitations in the permitting process. So we've looked at how we've actually moved a lot of the zoning that begins the permitting process into the Office of Buildings so that we have a consistent, seamless way of having the intake happen, having the zoning happen, and then having the plan reviews happen within the same office. So that is much more seamless right now. We have also looked, and we're calling that an improvement to calling that improvement kind of parallel reviews. But if we could accomplish that with site development, with watershed, watershed, site development is part of watershed, Parks and Rec, with ATL DOT, so that they are reviewing at the same time as we are reviewing, instead of us doing a review, them doing a review. Those are the types of things that cause the back and forth that you've described and that we're trying to eliminate. As far as trying to expedite affordable housing, we've recently started an interdepartmental group that's really looking at, first identifying affordable housing projects, because we've had a challenge there too. A lot of folks, a lot of developers don't want to identify their projects as affordable housing because we've had some pushback in certain districts about having too much affordable housing or too much of this type of housing. And so we've had some challenges identifying, what is an affordable housing project. And so we are looking at ways to make that process, first identify them and make that process easier for them by having this interdepartmental group understand what's in the pipeline, to know what projects are actually in the pipeline so that we can constantly check, and we meet on a weekly basis to constantly check where those projects are and if there are any problems or delays, what's causing those delays, and how can we track them better. We also want to once we get it up and running pretty smoothly, we want to do a lot more marketing of that process so that, developers can get over, being hesitant, because there will be the added benefit of having those projects be monitored much more closely than they have been in the past. And that's a benefit to them, that's a benefit to the city, that's a benefit to residents. So once we have it up and running a little bit more smoothly, we're going to do a little bit more marketing so that more people are aware of that. So those are just some examples of the improvements that we've been making. We've also been looking at how we can apply technology. There's certain permissions that we have in our softwares that are applied to allow or disallow certain things. We've been identifying those types of problems in our software so that we make it easier, much more seamless for reviewers and technicians to exchange information and not change information that they shouldn't be changing. So those are just some examples of some of the improvements that we have been making. Another very important one that I don't want to forget to mention is our development services team. And this is like a SWAT team of folks. And I think we have about, 4 or 5 folks in the development services team. And they are focused on nothing else but figuring out what projects have been are over our 10-day SLA. So when we started that process, we had about close to 5,000 permit applications that were over the 10-day SLA for whatever reason. And we have now reduced that through the focus and hard work of these guys. We've reduced that to about 500 applications that are over that 10-day SLA. Once we get through that backlog, the intent is never to go back there again. Once we clear it up, the focus of that team will shift to ensuring that we are maintaining that 10-day SLA consistently. So those are just a few examples.
And on a few quick questions on your performance metrics, and I'll put them all together. One is your target in FY22 and FY23 targets for publicly owned land activated by affordable housing. One, what is planning's definition of activated? And two, have we made any of those 6 targets, activated any of those 6 that were targets for 22? And how are we going to get, whether we have or haven't, how are we going to, almost triple that in this coming fiscal year?
Activated for us means that we've started pre-development on those sites. And so we've, I think so far, and Josh, if I miss a point, you can jump right in. But I think we've activated, and that is started pre-development on about 4 sites. How do we plan to almost triple that? Is through the work of our housing innovation team. We have identified a collection of public land that's owned by several city-owned agencies. We are looking actively at 5 to 8 major sites, and by major sites, I'm talking about, over 100 units being planned for these developments. And we're looking at about 8 to 10 potential smaller sites that would have anywhere between maybe 30, 50 units. So that's how we're basically planning to execute on this. And all this is being done as part of concerted efforts with the Mayor's Housing, Affordable Housing Strike Force. And these are not just sites that are owned by the City of Atlanta or the Department of City Planning, or DEEM for that matter. These are sites that are owned by AHA, by ABI, and Invest Atlanta, by other partner agencies, and even MARTA. And so we will be looking to work collaboratively with them to develop these sites, not just focusing on the smaller sites, but strategically focusing on the collection of sites within certain areas of Northwest Atlanta, East Atlanta, and other areas of the city. Would you like to add any points to that, Josh?
Hear me now? Yeah. One thing I think, for just some context, we started kind of the moving forward with the public land discussion. We presented to City Council a little over a year ago, I guess it was now. At that time, one of the biggest there were 2 main challenges. One, we didn't know a lot about our land from a housing development standpoint. We didn't have just like the basic due diligence work that a lot of the pre-development will uncover on a good chunk of city-owned land. The reality is the city had never thought about its land as a housing developer, particularly city land at least. And we didn't have staff that really knew how to develop land. We didn't have real estate finance, architect, or just real estate development expertise. And so the Housing Innovation Lab that we staffed up for the second half of last year, now we've got a team of 3 that started December, January. That team has been able to really sink their teeth into a lot of the pre-development questions of like, okay, here's 30 or 40 sites we think are viable. Let's start kind of checking down the list, make sure there's no red flags, there's not some significant development issue that could allow us to move forward on them. Because we had limited staff for the first half of the year, it took us a little bit of time to get moving on that. We do have 4 sites that we've got active on. 3 of them are sites that we moved to the Atlanta Land Trust through the Land Bank that are smaller scale development. There are 1 in West End and 2 in Oakland City. So we're working right now with Amanda Ryan and the Atlanta Land Trust on development for those. And so we got a public meeting on Thursday night on one of those sites. And then the other is the one at Fort Trinity, so that's a little bit of the larger scale development. I think that what we learned through that was, 1, we finally got a team that can do that type of work, and also an ability to a model to scale with that works well. And so we think it is a viable, can scale up to the 16 to do some large-scale sites as well as, and large-scale is everything from 104 Trinity to something that's multiple acres, that's more complex development that may take a few years to build out. As Janet mentioned, the mayor launched his housing strike force that's focused on public land development across all the public agencies. And one part of that is looking at areas where there's a confluence of public land. Thomasville is a good neighborhood example of that. Thomasville's got over 120 acres of publicly owned land that's vacant, underutilized, and we think that collaborating across all of our agencies, right? Some of it's owned by city planning, some of it's owned by the housing authority, the public school system owns some of that working to redevelop that in a way that not only looks at housing, but also looks at the broad needs of a neighborhood, the fresh food needs, education, healthcare needs, is a part of that larger strategy. And so there's active movement, and it's a key priority of the administration. We think that having the staff in place and really finding a model over the last year that works will allow us to scale up to 16 and I think really to scale beyond that as we grow and begin to leverage the land, now that we have a better sense of what we have and don't have, and a team that knows how to use the land in a way that we didn't before.
Thank you. One more quick question, and then then 2 requests. 1, staying on performance metrics. If nothing else, you've been consistent in the UDC, but if we have 2 years of actuals at 70 and we're targeting 70, it's been a while since I've been in grade school, but that's a F or a D minus. So, at what point do we say, well, the 25-day SLA is not achievable, adjust the SLA, or, what is the issue there? And then second, on the variance cases, why are we reducing, to my point, why are we reducing the SLA from 90 to 85?
And I'll put the performance metric question about the UDC to Doug Young. And Kieta, if you could answer the question on the special administrative permit reviews.
Great, thank you, Janet. Councilmember Hillis, the Urban Design Commission is one of the boards in the City of Atlanta that reviews what might be called by right projects. So unlike the Board of Zoning Adjustment or the Zoning Review Board, folks have to come to the UDC even if they are seemingly meeting the requirements of the district. And so we end up reviewing a lot of cases there that are involving homeowners themselves directly, and by facilitating them getting into the process quicker so we can start the process moving, we are pretty flexible on our application submission requirements, which means there's some follow-up on the back end. So we think that by increasing our educational efforts with our neighbors we work with, we have a couple ideas on how to do that as well. We can increase the document problems at the front end, which will help us meet our SLA on the back end a little bit quicker. I would also add that an equal number of cases that we do review do not go to the Urban Design Commission at all, but in fact they're administered by the staff. And so in fact we've tried to push more applications into our administrative review bucket to get them out of the public hearing process as well.
And before Ms. Holmes answers, the question wasn't for SAPs, because you're actually increasing your target there from 65 to 75, but about variance cases where you're reducing the target from 90 to 85.
And Ms. Holmes is going to address that comment as well.
excuse me, Councilmember Hillis, that reduction is based upon the level of cases that are being received with regard to variance applications. The BZA has been, for the past several months, operating on a one-meeting agenda based upon those number of cases because of them coming out of the neighborhood and the MPUs. Secondarily to that, the SLA is being amended down because the Board of Zoning adjustment is actually being changed or altered based upon House Bill 1405 and the length of time, the amount of time now that is required to advertise a case. It is being increased, perhaps it's being increased about 15 days. That 15 days will then alter when an application can be advertised, because when it will be heard by the NPU or the neighborhood association may not come out in a time to advertise that case. So that's why we're trending down right now. Hopefully we can get a system in place where that number goes back up, but until that is really realized, we would want to trend down.
Understood.
And I might also mention that House Bill 1405 is going to also have impacts on our UDC, the issuance of UDC certificates of improvement, of appropriateness as well, because we will be required to meet the requirements of that bill, and that in a lot of cases will add to the time frame. So from 25 days, we could be going up to 40 days.
All right, and then, as I said, the next items are just request. One, if you, all of these, if you or your staff could shoot me an email, and myself and Denise in my office, so we can get something scheduled to have some offline conversations. One, about there's a mention in here of your goals of the D.L. Hollowell Corridor LCI study, which I don't believe I've received any information on. Because it says if awarded. And then there's a lot in the presentation, which I greatly appreciate, about Chattahoochee Brick. Told the mayor I wanted him to be the mayor that brings our city to its river. So I believe we're well on our way now with the new leadership. So I'd just like to have a sit down with you and whoever is leading those multiple projects, whether it's Chattahoochee Brick, Chattahoochee Riverlands, et cetera, to discuss those. And then I would like some more information. You mentioned in your goals the Atlanta Cemetery Network. I would like some information about that.
Wonderful. We'd be happy to provide you with the information, as well as spend whatever time we can get scheduled with you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hillis. Next up is Dozier, followed by Amos, and then Shook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Commissioner Sitterfall. Good to see you all again, and I may see you all again tomorrow. I know
Yes,
we
you
have
will.
a tree protection meeting, or Thursday.
Is that tomorrow or Thursday?
Thursday.
I think it's Thursday.
Time is a flat circle. I had a couple questions. First, with regards to the public land development strategy, I really appreciated the insight you provided on that, Josh. I was curious, I'm really curious about the city's kind of mechanical role in this process. Are we operating as a general, developer? Are we doing any sort of general contracting? Are permits expedited because it's involving public land? Do we have any specific KPIs tied to those projects that we want to try to Dustin, our council member Hillis's point, are we trying to expedite those processes compared to what we typically would expect from our private developer coming before the Office of Planning or the Department of Planning to get their permits approved? I'm just kind of curious, kind of the mechanical aspects of what the city's doing to get these projects off the ground. It sounds like we have at least 3 staff members involved in this. What's that subcontracting process look like? Is that going through the typical RFP process? Just really interested in the fact that we're pursuing this, and we just want to know more about how we're supporting this going forward.
Well, I'll kick it off and I'll shoot it over to Josh. But really, we have been acting as the facilitator. We've been very, very active with our Housing Innovation Lab in just looking at the concept of how we can do this. And so we've been very involved in that. We've been very involved in the identification of these parcels. We've started doing a lot of the assessments. So we're doing a lot of the kind of technical assistance to get this up and running. And of course, we've now supported the mayor's office in convening the housing strike force, and we're going to, as part of that, continue to work with the various agencies to determine what's the best way to put these out for procurement. We have, well, I'll let Josh speak to the KPIs and the rest of that, because I think all of that is still very much under development, and he can tell you a little bit more specifically about where we are with that.
Thanks, Randy. To the question on permitting and priority and how this kind of fits in with everything else, I think that there is an opportunity. As we look at public land, I would argue that our public land is our most underutilized asset as a city right now. We have thousands of acres of publicly owned land. A lot of it's vacant, and it's not contributing from a cash flow standpoint, from a property taxes standpoint, or from a public good standpoint oftentimes. And so what we really want to do is we identify sites and then make them as attractive as possible. So figure out if it's a larger site and needs infrastructure build out, let's help finance the infrastructure. Let's get the entitlement work done, and then let's get it as permitted and entitled as fast as possible in partnership. Work with kind of across all the different public agencies that do housing. They all have funding, right? So Invest Atlanta has some funding, Atlanta Housing has some funding, and Beltline has different funding for affordable housing. Right now, what happens in a private development is somebody gets awarded a project, and then they have to go to 19 different boards to get approval to build out their capital stack, and it takes them 18 months to 2 years just to get the funding in place, even after they've been selected as a developer for a project. We want to shrink that down, right? So everything from the permitting and the entitlement side to putting the public capital stack together. So the project is as valuable from a time cost standpoint as possible to really maximize the value of the site itself in a way that we think can oftentimes cash flow for the city. I mean, one of our goals is that we maintain public ownership and look at ground lease models and stuff that can long-term be a revenue producer instead of giving that value away to private developers, which is oftentimes what we've done in the past. So streamlining all of that in a way that we actually think can make it more attractive as a development tool. That's part of it, I think.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you. I'm just curious, are the folks that are developing this property that we select as I know it's not city employees out there with shovels and construction equipment, but are they still paying permit fees or impact fees even though it's public land that's being developed?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, there are state laws and stuff that mandate some of the fees that have to be paid. There are some ways to get around particular fees, but nothing particular related to public land. Now, there is the question around property taxes and how that gets paid. In a ground lease model, you can negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes. You can have them pay regular property taxes. So that can be part of the subsidy stack, right, of how you do certain fees. But some fees, it doesn't matter if it's public land or not. So it'll just depend a bit on that as far as how that plays a role. And to your question on the general contractor or like kind of what the role the city plays, I do think in some ways it will vary from site to site. Some of the easier to build sites, maybe the city has more active role. Maybe as a JV partner, now may not be the city, but a city subsidiary may have a role as an equity partner. Sometimes it's going to be a debt partner and stuff, and sometimes it's going to be like, here's a ground lease, we select a developer, and they do a design and build. And really it's going to depend a lot on the specifics of the site.
And my thought around that question is largely recognizing the mayor's affordable housing goals and the fact that we're identifying additional public land for additional development opportunities. I imagine this would be a growth area for the Department of Planning to be able to support more projects and get more quick turnaround. And so even though we're kind of starting out the gates with this framework and building that out, this is something that, fiscal year 24, fiscal 25, we'll probably see continued growth in this area.
This is most definitely a growth area for the Department of City Planning. I think we've already made a significant contribution to that growth just between last fiscal year and this fiscal year. I think in the Office of Housing and Community Development, we've added, about 8 or 10 folks?
Yeah, but no new ones in this fiscal year, but in the previous one.
The previous
that allowed
fiscal year,
this.
sorry,
That's right.
Okay. And then just kind of going back to this growth question. I know the Center for Civic Innovation last year released their recommendations for the NPU initiative, and part of their recommendations included increased funding for personnel and technical assistance and support services for the NPU system, developing a campaign around awareness and teaching people how the NPU works and how to get involved. I know we already have the NPU University. Is there, at least with this budget or future budgets, are we expected to see some of the incorporation of some of those recommendations? I just was really taken aback with their presentation last year about how in 1974, in the initial inception of the NPU system, we had 18 dedicated staff members for the NPU system. Today it's closer to about 4 or 5. And just to kind of right set our support of that system, I'm curious to see if in this budget or in future budgets we can expect that be a growth area as well.
Yes. We added, I believe, 2 positions in FY22. In FY23, those vacant positions, that the 74.3 or whatever that number was, those will be looked at strategically to enhance the technical assistance and support that the NPUs and other areas of our department can deliver. And we also do a lot of, through our internship program, I think we have about 2 or 3 interns. And this is a great opportunity for them to understand how the system works, how planning works, and we've had a few instances where those interns have later joined our staff. So it's also a wonderful recruiting tool that we have. So yes, it's definitely another one of those growth areas that we foresee in future fiscal years.
Okay. And then my last question is just with regards to the presentation around the boardwalk on Broad Street. It's a $500,000 investment. I imagine, because I know that we're repairing what was there before, I'm curious if you can provide some insight into why the initial boardwalk fell into disrepair, and will this current rehab or reinstallation be something that will be spending another $500,000 on in years to come? I just recognizing that I glanced at the website yesterday, and I saw roughly about $500,000 is what we've given out in terms of placemaking grants. So maybe there's an opportunity to redirect those sorts of funds. Maybe in the future, once we see that, okay, this boardwalk's not working out, maybe we can figure out other ways to do placemaking and maybe spread the love a little bit with some communities that would love to tap into those grants, and maybe the funding allocation isn't sufficient. $500,000 can go a long way. So just curious about how we got to where we are with that particular project, and whether we're concerned that we'll be back in this position in the years to come.
Well, let me just say, first of all, that the whole intent of the reinvestment into the boardwalk is so that we don't get back to where we were, and 2, that the boardwalk is really looked at as almost like a beginning point of what we can do along Broad Street, looking at it from where the boardwalk is currently on Lucky Street, all the way down to, if we have our way with certain other projects, we would reconnect Broad Street as part of the MARTA transformation project, the 5 Points transformation project. So it's really the beginning point of a larger vision for Broad Street. But in terms of the disrepair and how we got there and how we've been moving through that, I'll let Kevin Bacon respond to that piece of your question.
Good morning, Council Member. The boardwalk, it's been an ongoing project of ours. Like Commissioner Sidofal mentioned, the $500,000 that we're putting into the deck now is for the foreseeable future. When it was designed and built back in 2017, it was envisioned as a 2 to 3 year pilot project, and that project. It was an experiment. It ran the clock out, and unfortunately it ran it out right when we were hitting the pandemic, which was a difficult time for all public spaces in downtown. At the time that there were some of the issues pointed, we were already aware of those and working to actively redesign the deck. The biggest change is actually going to be underneath and making it much more secure and stable to withstand a lot of things that we've learned in terms of water and trash and debris, so that we don't have to come back and make that investment again. That money was already set aside for public space work specifically in downtown. It did not take away from our ability to spread the love around with other public space projects throughout the city, which we share your same passion about. Our other program, Love Our Places, which is our placemaking program, that taps money from the MARTA bus advertising fund. A couple of years ago, we upped that amount that we were drawing down from $100,000 a year to $300,000 a year, so we could spread the love around more. And that's when you see the bike parking and the parklets before that. That was the drive to do that, so that we're touching as many neighborhoods as possible. We're reaching out to them, letting them know that this money is available, and working with them on their applications. And that will continue into the future. We'll figure out what next year's project is. We're working on getting the bike parking deployed here over the summer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I give my time.
Councilmember Amos, then Shook, and we've been joined by Councilmember Michael Bond.
Thank you. Let me just start with there are some great things happening. I'm glad you and your team is looking at what we can do better around permitting, getting people out. Thank God we finally taken the lead on developing public land. That's a long time coming. But I need your help. Coming from my district, in which we often felt like we're being planned for and not planned with, your budget or your presentation doesn't encourage me. It doesn't encourage me because we are sending an unintentional message. The message that we're sending with this budget and this presentation, the neighborhood planning units, Atlanta Planning Advisory Board are second thoughts to planning, and I know that's not the message we're sending. Then when my colleague asked you about what will we do about building it out, and you mentioned that the 74, 73 positions will be looked at strategically to possibly support. It's words like that that send the wrong message. So where in this budget that can make me feel more comfortable in supporting it and supporting the people of Atlanta, that we talk about neighborhood planning units, especially, and I know you're working on the paper as far as the best practices, but we still need to instill confidence in our neighbors as they get more active, that their hard work, their volunteer work, doesn't go unnoticed when it gets down here to this building. So help me out. Let's talk about the matrix of, I guess the rubric that we use to make sure our NPUs are effective, make sure that APAP is affected. So that's the first question. Let's stop there. Even the mayor's transitional report talk about the office, possibly developing the Office of Neighborhoods. Nowhere in the budget, nowhere in the conversation. So I'll stop there, and I have two more questions after that. So.
Well, thank you for that question, because we have been investing a lot of time and effort in our NPU system. As I said, we have grown that staff. When we moved in 2018, I believe, or 2019, we moved the NPU staff from the Office of Zoning and Development and put it into the Commissioner's office, because we wanted to be able to give that office a much higher profile and to have more hands-on interaction, not just with the NPU staff, but with NPU leadership overall, and how that program is run for the not just for the Department of City Planning, but for the city. So that was one thing that we did. As part of that, we upped staffing by, so far, 2 new members. So that was staff that we didn't have before, that we now have, to be able to allow a much greater focus on activities such as NPU University, working directly with communities on, how they develop their bylaws, how they conduct their meetings. Throughout the whole pandemic, we provided direct support for Zoom meetings and a lot of their activities. So all of these things have been done over time. A big focus of ours right now, and Leah LaRue, who heads up our NPU unit, and I joke because we've been having what we call a listening tour. Every Friday, I meet with at least 2 members of NPU leadership, and we're actually coming to a close right now to identify with them what's working and what's not working, so that we have the information to be able to support decisions about what we change, how we change it, and how we staff those changes. So that is an ongoing effort, and it's been quite an experience for me because, as you've said, these are folks who volunteer their time. They're not paid. And in a lot of cases, it's like having a second or third job. And if nothing else, we hope to demonstrate that, 1, city planning is available. 2, city planning wants to listen. City planning wants to hear about the challenges that they're having, and they're in the best position to help us identify opportunities for improvement. So that has been ongoing for several months now, and it will continue as long as I'm in this position, because I think it's been beneficial for me, and I know that it's been beneficial for a lot of the leadership because they've told me so. So we will use a lot of that information. Before I conclude, we also about a month ago had a neighborhood forum where we collected a lot of information at the neighborhood level, not at the NPU level. And that is very good information that we've been gathering that will also support decisions. So my hope is that over the next 3 to 6 months, we're able to put together a sound and realistic proposal on how we move and improve the NPU system. We're not looking at a complete overhaul. We're just looking at, what's been working and what's not been working and how can we fix some of these things. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to bring that to you in the next few months.
And thank you for going out to the listening sessions, because people need to see that. Like I say, you being out there means a lot. And I come from the world of community organizing, so I know when you're standing in between neighborhood level leadership and NPU level leadership, it's like being in a nursery with a brand new toy. So I understand that our communities have a long way to go. So I just want to make sure we're doing everything within our power. So when I'm standing between the planning department and the communities, I'm able to say that here's the tool that we have put in place. So I appreciate that. The last thing is, as we talk about the 5 to 8 city-owned sites that we're developing, are we also talking with our partners like Invest Atlanta to not only talk about the site, but to talk about the amenities around the site? How do we get small neighborhood businesses involved and things of that nature? So that conversation is taking place as we build out.
Most definitely, and I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the Housing Strike Force, because it is actively bringing all of those agencies together, and we are looking holistically, not just at the affordable housing or the housing element, but we're looking at connectivity. We're looking at how we provide transportation. We're looking at how we provide better food access. We're looking at enhancing quality of life, looking at potential for how we improve our public realm, so that it is a much more holistic approach than we've had in the past.
Okay. Last but not least, as we look at those FTE, we really do need some in, NPU. Oh, okay.
I support you on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll cut this short. So how are you allocating these 60 new positions across your organization?
The 60 positions most of them, of course, have been going to the Office of Buildings because that's where the greatest needs are, and probably the greatest variety of activities. So we've added in terms of short-term rentals. We've added in terms of code enforcement. We've actually upped our code enforcement from about 6 to almost 20 enforcement officers. We've added a few to the Office of the Commissioner. A big part of what we do has to do with marketing and communications, and so we are staffing up a small team of marketing and communications staff to help us publicize and engage the community in all of these initiatives that we've been conducting and implementing. We've also added significantly to our Office of Housing and Community Development through our efforts to establish the Housing Innovation Lab. So those are just examples of where we've distributed some of these additional FTEs.
Okay. So adding 60 new positions, 2% COLA across the organization, and yet your salary line is only showing a $781,000 increase. That doesn't seem to add up to me. And maybe that's a finance question.
Yeah. I would say, one, that, part of it is that we're hiring varying levels. Not all of those salaries are very high-paying salaries.
Sure.
And in a lot of cases, we've also had some different, well, we've used some, in some cases, I think we've used a few extra help positions, so those are not counted as part of our overall FTEs. But I would have to say that, the best answer I can give is really the variances between the varying salary levels of the professionals that we've been hiring over time.
And I'll look to finance later to, get some more detail on that. How's the zoning update coming?
The zoning update I'm happy to say, is going very, very well.
What year are we in?
We are in year one. We are about to complete year one.
We've been in year one for 7 years.
Well, actually, we just kicked it off last year. Yeah, it took us a little bit of time. I'm right there with you, Councilmember Shook. It took us a little bit of time to get it up and running. A lot of it was just around scoping that work properly. And I think we have a good scope. And it also took us a little time to procure the services. So we've got a good team on board who we're very, very happy with. They've been doing a lot of really good community engagement that's been very well received.
And they're all still living.
And yes, they are. I'm happy to say.
Surprising.
So that work is going very well. We expect to be continuing that in conjunction with our 2026 CDP update, which is something we've never done before. And I think we'll reap a lot of benefits from, because as you know, a huge part of our CDP update relates to zoning and is driven by the type of zoning that we put in place. So those two efforts will be going concurrently. We hope to procure the services for the 2026 CDP early in fiscal 23, and those two projects will be going concurrently, and they are being led by the same consultant team so that we have better integration.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shook. I'm going to wrap up with a couple of quick questions. One is, are we back 100% in terms of field and office? Everything operationally is back in person at this point, correct?
Everything is up and running operationally on a hybrid. Yes.
Okay.
Almost all of our staff, except for the field staff, our inspectors and our code enforcement folks, all those guys are out in the field. They are not, pardon? They're 100%, yes. But everybody else, all of our office staff, are back on a hybrid.
Okay. That's good to hear, because I think, we are still going to hopefully experience this surge or this high level of development and activity. with the possibility of a recession coming a year from now. So I would say let's try and move as much as we can with the team, understanding the vacancies and all. I'm glad to hear about the code enforcement increase. That was the comment I was going to make, is if the second most complaint I get is
After permitting, I'm sure, is code enforcement.
Right. And so I think it's really important that, we're not only making sure that we're helping our applicants get to yes and get to their projects, but also once it's constructed, or if there's other activity out there that we don't know about, that we have a way of finding that. So that's encouraging as well. I appreciate the work that your team, you and your team are doing. My final message is just, we're riding a wave right now. Let's keep riding it as quickly as we can, understanding that we may see a dip in that next year. But it's a good sign, and to the extent that you've got the resources to be able to accomplish what you need, then Godspeed. So.
Thank you. And just in terms of the dip, if the pandemic is any indicator, we didn't take much of a dip during the pandemic. So we'll see how it goes. But we're very, very thankful that we were able to get things up and running as quickly as we were, from completely manual submittal of applications to our do-it-yourself online process that we currently have. And I think, given the work that we've been doing with our stakeholders and getting them engaged as part of the process has been extremely beneficial. They are truly our partners, and we're bringing on more and more partners as we move along. And with the implementation of technological improvements, like the improvements to our electronic plan review, I think we will be seeing even more improvements and even better customer service as we move forward. That is certainly our intent.
Just keep looking for the strategy. I think the strike team concept that you talked about is really brilliant and effective. So just keep looking for ways that we can better serve our communities.
Well, thank you all very much for your time, and thank you all for the support that you've given us in terms of approving our initiatives, approving our budget requests, providing us legislation to implement our projects. And let me just say that I can't do this alone. I'm very, very thankful for the very competent folks that surround me, as well as the other 200-plus employees of the Department of City Planning who support us all each and every day, and I'm very, very grateful for their dedication and commitment to what they do. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and enjoy the rest of your week.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Siddefall. All right, so colleagues, lunch is served in the conference room. We will convene back at 1 p.m., so 1 o'clock for Parks.
Anybody want an extra?
I've got mine in my office. I suspect the room is filled with green, so if you have anything green in your office, you might want to put it on before 1 o'clock.